The Bulldogs are back at #1, but that really doesn't mean that much in this neck of the woods anymore. Hey everybody, this is Sarah Spencer with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and this is Know Your Dogs. Georgia begins SEC play Saturday in South Carolina, and they'll do so as the top-ranked team in college football. But Georgia coach Kirby Smart knows being #1 this early in the season means basically nothing. We'll be joined by Smart, Broderick Jones, Brock Bowers, and our Georgia beat writer Chip Towers to break down Saturday's game against the Gamecocks, so stay with us.
It's never a big deal. It only matters at the end of the year. I don't know that we've spent many weeks outside the top 10, and it never mattered whether we were inside the top 10 or outside the top 10. It just is irrelevant. I mean, just a lot more worried about how we execute a combo block than I am worried about what we're ranked. And hopefully the kids are the same way.
Now, all of that is valid by Kirby Smart there, but I will say when you're the top-ranked team, you do get everybody's best shot, so that is one thing to keep in mind. Now, Georgia did have to settle for 4 field goals in the win against Samford, which is really not ideal, and the offense will be up for another big challenge playing in the always rowdy Williams-Brice Stadium. I asked tight end Brock Bowers, how do you deal with that as an offense when you literally can't hear what's being called or what's going on around you? And he said, fortunately, Georgia's offense uses a lot of hand signals, so that makes play calling a little bit easier. But he did mention they've still been cranking up the crowd noise at practices so they can kind of get acclimated.
Yeah, like we do crowd noise like over the loudspeakers, so it gets hard to hear sometimes just working on things on offense without being able to hear, because I'm just trying to imitate the game as much as we can here during practice. What helps too is just trying to process before the play, like what could be checked where, and so that helps a lot too. But most of it's just, I remember Auburn last year, we couldn't hear a thing, and just, it was kind of surprising to me, because that was like, I think our first, or one of our first actual road games in the SEC.
Now, it's only 2 games, but Georgia has not found the success on the ground that we're used to seeing from this program. They're averaging about 4.5 yards per carry, and through 2 games, they rushed for 259 yards, which is actually 10th in the SEC. But tackle Broderick Jones, the guy who's usually paving the way for a lot of these runs, mentioned that they might be looking to attack a little bit more this week.
All our running backs are explosive. You know, Kendall, he's running very well. You know, his weight's good. You know, he's a powerful running back. So I plan on seeing more of him, like, you know, downhill running and just getting after it. I think every game is, you know, we try and, you know, impose our will in the running game, you know, no matter who we're playing. So, you know, that's always the goal is, you know, to impose your will in the running game. So I think we'll attack it a little bit more this week.
All right, everybody, let's bring in our Georgia beat writer, Chip Towers. Chip, Georgia's entering SEC play. Obviously, you know, the line's hovering at about 24. Georgia's won 6 of the last 7 against South Carolina. But, I mean, the level of competition, you're in SEC play, it is about to go up. Do you see that being such a blowout like the numbers might predict?
Well, you know, I'm always wary of big lines, you know, period. And then, of course, I was wary of that Oregon line, and Georgia goes in there and doubles it or whatever it was. But, you know, it's really interesting playing South Carolina in Columbia. That's been a house of horrors at times for Georgia over there playing in Columbia. Typically it's, you know, 100 degrees, and
loud.
They play them early in the season, and the Gamecocks are always brimming with confidence. Now, that's not necessarily the case this year. They've already lost their SEC opener on the road at Arkansas, but you know, right now there's no reason to doubt Georgia. They've been taking care of business, and I certainly wouldn't be surprised if they do or don't cover that line either way.
I think quarterback Spencer Rattler is someone people would be interested to hear about. Just matchup-wise overall, how do you feel like these 2 teams match up?
Well, you know, Spencer Rattler is obviously a big storyline for this game. He's probably the highest profile transfer in the SEC this year coming from Oklahoma. But for me, my real intrigue is with Georgia's defensive backs. That's a young group back there. 3 of the 5 are new starters. You obviously have Malachi Starks, who's been fantastic, but he's starting now at that safety position. And they will be tested by Spencer Rattler. Wherever you fall on the Spencer Rattler spectrum, I mean, he's been a very polarizing quarterback this time at Oklahoma. Even this year, he hasn't been great. You know, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, but he can spin the ball now, I'm telling you. He can throw it 70 yards in the air. And so they're going to test Georgia. They're going to test them early. They're going to test them a lot, and they're going to test them deep. And Georgia has not been tested to the degree they're going to be tested on Saturday at Williams-Brice Stadium. Excuse me.
Let's talk about Georgia's run game and Georgia's offense a little bit, because I don't think it's looked, for being called RBU sometimes, it hasn't quite looked like that early in the season. Now, they've only played 2 games. I think it was averaging 4 yards a carry against Samford, you said. Against an FCS opponent, I mean, you just don't expect that from Georgia, but they're also throwing it really well. Stetson Bennett's been great. What do you make of those run game numbers that aren't as amazing as we're maybe used to seeing?
Well, it's 2 things. I mean, you mentioned 4 yards per carry against Samford. Cedric Van Pran, the starting center, flat out said that, that's not the standard. We're not meeting the standard. And Georgia's supposed to average 5 yards a carry, I think is what they expect at least in every game. So that's really not about how much you're running the ball, it's how well you're running the ball when you run it. And look, a lot of it's by design. Georgia's just not running the football as much this year. They're throwing it. This system is much more open, much more ball distribution by Stetson Bennett, who's completing nearly 75% of his passes. So, there's more than one way to skin a cat, I guess you would say. And Georgia's passing more often. They're leading the SEC in passing. But when you do run it, you got to run it better than Georgia is, and that contributed to a very poor, touchdown percentage in the red zone against Samford this past Saturday, after being just unbelievable against Oregon in the opener.
One last quick one for you. Georgia's back up to #1 in the polls. You mentioned Cedric Van Pran. One kind of funny thing I thought he said the other day was he shed some light on Georgia's mantras this season. Nobody cares about your feelings.
Yeah.
Like, ouch, but also probably accurate. I mean, South Carolina doesn't care that you're #1. What did you make of that mantra?
Well, I kind of disagree with him a little bit on that front, because South Carolina, I promise you, they care. All the teams that care. Already you can see it, bantered all about in Columbia, that last time they beat a #1 team was in 2010 when Alabama came to Columbia and they beat them 35-10 or something like 35-21. I think it was. So, it really is important to the other team that you're #1, but I get what they're talking about. Kirby Smart and his teams, they come up with an adage every year, whether it's chopping wood. Yeah, that's one that's stuck all along. It's always something. This one, nobody cares about your feelings. I think it's pretty cool.
Chip, thank you so much for helping me preview Georgia's game against South Carolina. Make sure you guys go to ajc.com to check out this video and more just like it.